Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Dave Albert. In this show, I talk about technology, building a company as a CTO and co-founder, and have guests to discuss their roles in technology and entrepreneurship. Today, I'm joined by Angela Duffy, MBA, PhD, and venture investment leader at the NDRC. Thanks for joining me, Angela.
Oh, you're welcome, Dave. It's nice to be here.
Great. Thanks so much. Would you give us a little bit of a intro to yourself and some of your background?
Ooh, where do I start? I think, I'm a country girl from the middle of nowhere in Ireland. I somehow managed to wander my way towards Dublin and was here for a while in college and then working. So I started out on a path as a scientist and ended up as a crazy scientist in labs and doing research on cancer and also on heart disease, particularly cardiovascular disease, where you'd have a myocardial infarction, a heart attack known otherwise to the public. And then I migrated from Dublin to Galway, lived there for quite a long while. And I think that's why my accent doesn't resonate with people now, because it's been flattened by the Galwegians. So I was in research there again in the university for a while, and then collaborated with a large corporate company. They were an American multinational at the time. And then I was adopted by them. So I went to work in the corporate world. And that was a big change. And I really enjoyed it because it was challenging and fast. And I did begin in a tech role on innovation, patenting, research, R&D, prototyping new products and what they call a phase zero type role. But I then started to really work with a lot of the physicians who were our customers, and they understood my language and I theirs because of the scientific background. And so I started to do a lot of customer-facing work and transitioned a lot into market and customer research. And then went off and, as you mentioned, did some business studies. I ran up and down the road, actually, from Galway to Dublin to do those, and that was a busy time. But I then focused on strategy, particularly around marketing strategy in terms of bringing customer voice into the organisation to map where we would go in terms of product and overall strategy. So a bit of an evolution, I think, from the hills of Monaghan to what I'm up to these days.
So what kind of companies do you work with here at the NDRC?
Yeah, so here, from a corporate world, now working with the small companies, startup companies. They're all focused on very many and very different industries, but at their core, they have a digital component, particularly product, usually software, but also software and hardware. And what I and my colleagues and the group here do is really to help them with their strategy, in focusing them on a sort of a global target market, and really looking at where they should aim for to be successful, sort of an area that will help them to prove themselves in the market, help them to build out not only their strategy but also the processes, and then to really think about how they can broaden and expand beyond that.
Yeah. I mean, that's similar to how other VILs have, I've spoken to Alan and Dermot. It's a similar type of role, of course, both all of you being VILs. How many companies do you have in your portfolio?
In my portfolio, so I suppose the way we operate, there's a team of us, as you mentioned, some of my colleagues there, and we really work I suppose, 1-to-1 as a mentor with particular companies. That's not to say that we don't interact with all the companies. We pretty much do. And we've all different backgrounds and skill sets that are brought to bear. So thinking about it, probably in the region of 12 companies. We've companies that are spread across Ireland. We've ran the programme out of Waterford, Galway and Dublin. So companies spanning all of those areas. And it's really interesting to see how we now, and especially with such technologies and video conferencing, that we can communicate and have our one-to-one sort of mentoring anywhere from anywhere, and really get the job done. So people out there are mobile, often their teams are mobile, and we are too. I mean, we move around quite a lot, but we do a lot of face-to-face and whiteboarding, which is useful, but we do work on the fly and as we go, and I think that suits the startup world as well.
Yeah, we use, video chat. Mm-hmm. I mean, we have some people in India, so it'd be awfully hard to, to have them over for every weekly meeting. Yeah. Or stand up would be even harder.
Sure.
So, all of our team meetings are always in video conferencing. So that's, I don't know how people operated before that. I mean, I guess that's why it was harder to remote work.
We've had, so I worked in the corporate world. So the organization was global. As I mentioned, it had been an American multinational. In fact, it merged with another large company, and they became an Irish registered company, which is really interesting. I was a shareholder in there, as most employees were, but so were some people that were from Minnesota. The company had grown up out of there, and it was unusual for them to see, I guess, their company that had sprouted from a shed, effectively, locally there, grow so large, and become such a big entity. But we communicated, and I ran a lot of projects that were across all sorts of geographies. One in particular was China is to Ireland is to San Francisco, or the Bay Area, which meant that at any one time to have a team meeting, someone had to do the midnight call. But we did do that. We did have it. We had not a video conference, but we did have our phone conferencing. And there's always a delay. There's always, I'm late, or, and you repeat probably 4 or 5 times what's been said at the beginning of the conference. I know there are some funny videos and podcasts around that as well, but it worked. It worked okay. But things are getting better. We had, Puerto Rico is to Minneapolis is to Ireland as well. And, that was difference in terms of language. Again, when you're speaking with people, and I suppose that's another reason why I have a neutralized accent, people need to understand you. And it takes a while, particularly when you're not looking at someone, because we don't pick up the 80% signals that come at us. And when you're on a conference call, it's harder, and it's much better if you can talk slowly, and try to be understood.
I remember hearing, in the US, there are a few large call centers that are basically strategically placed somewhat in the middle of the country, because the accent was not as abrasive. Oh. So someone in the deep South would maybe be offended by, a far northern, East Coast style
turn of phrase.
So it was so interesting to hear that, and then you to echo that same kind of sentiment.
Absolutely. And same in Ireland. I mean, how small is Ireland by comparison to the US, and how different are the accents? And Dave, you must see it somehow, from Cork to Donegal, and inner city Dublin often is another strong accent. So you must have come across, even in a small country like ours, a variety of different accents there.
Well, actually, the island of Ireland is the same size as the state of West Virginia that I'm from.
I've been to West Virginia.
Have you?
Yes, one of the first places I visited. When I went to the US. Many years ago for a bluegrass festival.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, Ralph Stanley's hometown. Watching him and his friends and some of his band play on the back of a trailer in a field. In the middle of nowhere in West Virginia. So there you go.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
I don't know that we've ever.
Did we not? We never.
Maybe we did. I don't know. I can't remember it.
There you go.
What sort of things do you wish that the people that come into the program would know beforehand? So the companies that you mentor, would it have been nice if they'd known before they got here?
Oh, that's an interesting question. One thing that always springs to mind is, for me, the lack of research they've done on their market. So it's interpreting it in one way. I would like people who are starting out in their startup businesses to really consider if it's worth their while, and not to look at it from an ability to execute, but more from an opportunity perspective. So I think more people should think about that for any business and starting out. Specifically coming in here, what I do find is people are looking at, I suppose, the package that's offered, which is a mix of value add program, mentoring, which is quite customized because it's a 1:1. And they're looking also at the funding that comes with it. So absolutely, the majority of people are focused on the funding, and that's on entry. On exit, we find, and you could allude to it, and others maybe from the different cohorts, that disappears in terms of a focus, and that the program, the value add, the mentoring, and the having somebody around to bounce things off, it really becomes important. So I would like people to understand a bit more about what it means to have the support around you, and to have those voices that maybe have been through it before, to have other people that are peers that you can go to, and people that have been entrepreneurs for quite a while, and that can give you a lessons learned, what to do or not do. And all those things come as part of being here. A lot of it can be fluid when people are together. And I remember probably about 1.5 years ago going out to UCD, they were hosting people, I think from MIT, Stanford themselves, maybe Trinity and other places. And it was about knowledge transfer. And I think putting people and co-locating people, brings about knowledge transfer that you just, you can't anticipate, but we have seen it. And I would love if people, and there are people who recognize that before they come in, but a lot of people focus more on the cash, than they do on the value add.
Sure. Yeah. And you know, when you're a startup with no money coming in, it's hard not to focus on that at least a bit. But what you said there about, focusing more on the market and the opportunity as opposed to the product. I know as an engineer, I have that problem. There's a problem. I need to go solve it.
Yeah.
As opposed to starting with is this the right thing to solve?
Yeah.
And that's what we found through the program was, even though Julie, our CEO, has such a deep knowledge of the space, we knew what we needed, but some of our priorities could have been a little bit different had we done some of the things that we learned through the program of the user interviews earlier. So the whole, get out of the building and go talk to your users or customers first is such a valuable thing to know. And so many people that I've known in my past careers who would ask how I build this thing, and I would have helped them build it in the past. Now it's stop.
Yes.
Let's go find the people who will give you money for this, who will use this. Yeah. Let's make sure that there's a reason to do this.
Yeah.
Maybe we can do a small trial test of something, but let's not basically re-engineer something that may already exist in a market that isn't valuable for you and you're not interested in staying in.
I call this a penny drop moment for me, and it's part of the exposure I had working in a large company and, working in an R&D perspective, again, on the tech, on the product, on what you build and what you test. And I sat a little bit outside of the main product development groups who were literally coming up with specifications, and testing, because we would have in a medtech environment had deep testing for quality, metrics, and they were very focused on getting the product functional. And I had the advantage then of being exposed more to the customers than often some of them were. And I remember us running some sessions with customers where prototypes were being used and tested, and, we were getting impressions from some of the people that might use them. And these were very early phase prototypes. And, what I'll call them engineers and technical people came back with was very different to the perspective I had, just watching how they So the customer saw the product or interacted with it. And I thought, wow, we need to document this because you have a biased perception. And I went in because I didn't own the prototype and had an advantage that was slightly unbiased and thought, that's not what they said. And that's not what 3 or 4 people said. The majority actually had a little bit of a different view. And so penny dropped for me there a little bit. And I then started to bring a lot of the engineers that I worked with out to the field. So I got to be in the environment where the products were used quite a lot. And I saw that if you asked people, like the nurses, the support staff, the doctors themselves, how things were, they'd tell you a fairly good answer. But if you sat there and watched, you realized even what they vocalized, unbeknownst to them, wasn't exactly the way it was. So I started to bring engineers out, and you could see their, oh, really? Faces as well. And I got great satisfaction out of that, because it wasn't just me. And I started to bring that mindset into the organization I worked with and had pleasure work with large companies in design thinking and in design in general, IDEO being one of them, and worked with them across the globe in China and India and different places, and then brought that sort of mindset into the technical community. And actually I emailed a friend from the US over the weekend because I had a bit more time on the long bank holiday, but last year he had seen an award that had been given to a product that basically I had affected, whereby they had redesigned things from a user perspective, and not just from a functional perspective. And he said, I just saw this award that was given to the product, and I think that's probably because of you. And that's years after I've left the company, and it was lovely to see that somehow I had a positive effect.
You have a positive effect everywhere you go.
No, I don't know. You haven't seen me at home. Good cop, bad cop.
What is the biggest thing that you see in the companies that makes it so appealing to select them? Of the companies you've dealt with.
Yeah. And I've learned this over time, interacting with more and more. Definitely number one would be people. I think and it's kind of a hard thing to put your finger on. People say, what is it that defines an entrepreneur? And I don't know that that's something we can answer categorically. I think that there's an essence, there's a presence, there's perseverance, but also, and one of the most important things is that ability to be flexible and to learn. And it's really important that somebody is able to do that. What we would say is coachable, because we're coaching or we're guiding. We're not helping people to make their decisions, but we're giving them information. And if they can take that on board, and select things that are relevant to them, or, that are not, and take the things away that are applicable and put it into action, I think that's really important. So I think identifying that ability, because markets change, products change, competitors come in and out of the market, and what you start out with is often not what you end up with, and even in a small space of time. So you need a team and people that are capable of flexing with that. I do think that the other side of it is we are thinking about this from the perspective of a next round investor. So when we're thinking of teams coming in, we do have to think in the mindset of the people that may be looking at them in the next round. And so what is attractive and what is investable is very important. And we mentioned opportunity earlier. So I think that, if there's opportunity out there, it must be big enough for it to be worth your while as a company, as founders. But also, if you feel that you have an ambition to grow, you need support along the way, that you're able to take that on board in the mentoring sense, but also that you're willing to give up some of the equity piece, to bring on money that will allow you grow. And that you have that vision and ambition, and that there is space, that you have identified a market that's big enough, and that there are verticals for you to expand into as you grow.
Yeah, that's Julie and I have gone back and forth on how much more funding, we want, whether it's a little bit or a lot. And, it's all about the speed of scaling, which is all money does really is it's a function to help with that.
I'd agree with that. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I don't know, speed is one of the hardest things for us. What do you see? Have you seen anything that has helped the speed of your companies or?
So it's interesting because we don't necessarily, and I don't necessarily want companies to, go straight in and thinking, I need to raise a round. That's my goal here. Your goal is to build a business. In whatever shape or form that takes, and take on board all the changes around you. So I think what it looks like is that if you can satisfy the market, you can be revenue generating. And people, and there are teams and companies with us that are revenue generating, and want and feel comfortable in solidifying their position. And then they will look into it. And we've seen this more and more. Then they will look into that, speed or growth. I'm not sure which. The speed thing, I think from your perspective, you're kind of saying that if I had an injection of cash, would it speed things up? I don't know that that's necessarily true. I've seen people that have taken on funding, and maybe haven't lived up to the expectation they set themselves, or maybe that the investors had. And I think you need to be careful. People being offered money and just taking it because it's on the table is not appropriate. I think that you need to have an understanding of what you're going to achieve with that. Yeah. I had one company, just before Christmas, and they were offered or had on the table quite a large amount of money, for the position that they were in. And they're a young company. They actually, came on board, and the gentleman who leads the company left his role. He was full-time employed this time last year. So April, May last year. And so they've grown and they've done really well. People that he had, who joined him helped him with speed. And I think that it wasn't money at all. He's now at a point where he has been, showing progress. So people are interested in investing, and he had substantial interest. But when we discussed things, he said, I don't know yet what I would spend that money on. So I don't think it's appropriate for me to take that amount. And so let's look at it in stages. And what do I need to achieve this and that? And with, I suppose, the capacity that he had, what that would look like in whatever 6, 12, 18 months time, and to break it down. So I thought that was very wise of him. And also I think in general, it's very wise of anybody to think about what they want to achieve and break it down. We talk about milestones in here all the time. We tranche our investments and we put milestones down, but we think about those quite a lot. One, they set a goal, and we're people need goals, and even if it's just a notional, goal that you set for yourself personally, it does help you. It's laid down there somewhere in the mind, and it's kind of subconsciously, something that you grow towards and aim towards. So the same thing with milestones, but you do have to have a sense of where you're going to be, and then package up what that looks like in terms of funding, effort, personnel, and strategy. And that's the way I see it.
Yeah, I guess, I said speed, and that's really kind of a bit too broad of a term, because is that the speed of product development, or offering, the growth of the offering, or the acquisition of users or customers, or, sales figures.
Yes.
So
yeah.
I guess it all depends on your specific situation. And one of the ones we have, at least in my opinion, the problem is we have that two-sided business where we have to acquire users.
Yes.
And then we can acquire customers. And users don't bring money for us. They cost money to acquire.
Yes.
And they're conservative users, so we have to develop quite a well-developed product to be able to deliver for doctors.
Yes.
They're quite conservative.
Yes.
So that's one of the reasons that it's so hard for us to have speed of product development. It's because it has to be solid, secure, well thought out.
Yeah. You've hit the nail on the head because every company is different. What speed means to you is to bring on some of those users such that you can build the other side. Where speed to somebody else is getting, a technology built. We have a company that I'm going to hopefully work with in the next number of months. And for them is they really want to get the technology mapped out, and be able to test it. And so it's very different company to company. We'd, a company here that wanted to, really look at the market and see could they gain, as you say, users. And they did that, and that was their first port of call, but they were building a technology in parallel. But speed had to be users first here to test the overall concept before they start to build the technology. So it is interesting. I think if I took any and all of the companies, speed would mean something a little bit different to all of them. Yeah.
Yeah. What, so you're one of the only, you're the only female venture investment leader. Do you see any differences in the way that affects the way that you interact with companies or with other people within the community?
It probably does. So I'm very much an advocate of equal and different, is probably the way I put it. And I do think that there's different approaches. And I think, if I thought about my team, it's more a personality based approach, I would say, rather than a male female thing. I know, certainly, if you take Alan, he's unbelievable at execution. He would also bring me into discussions and I may come out with something, which is, a different, and maybe personal and a more personalized, sort of take. And he'd say, that is something I didn't notice because I'm busy trying to get to a goal, and I maybe would monitor the behavior of the person, or pick up a signal on how they were feeling or something like that because they were under pressure. So it is useful and not just a male-female way, but to have two of us or more, together with ventures. And we do that quite a lot. I think, I probably have, and it's a collaborative approach. I do think I am working with teams on teams, in these companies. And so I think sitting beside them and figuring it out, is a nice approach. Now, sometimes that takes longer. And so often there isn't enough time for miles of collaboration. And it is interesting when I say, look, it really needs to be, done right now, that it gets done because it's a not crying wolf situation. I've seen where, people were working on, doing their market research, but they were comfortable in a zone of testing it among peers, and going out to their network and maybe one step beyond their network. And that's somehow, a self-validation, if you like. And they were getting the answer that it wasn't, what they were proposing wasn't attractive. Where I was asking them quite a lot to go beyond that, to look at, various other people, within the industries they were thinking about, to ask them across different functional groups. So time passed and they didn't get around to doing this extra research, until one day I stood up and I said, I can't work alongside you because me and everybody else has been telling you, when you keep getting no, that you have to go beyond that group. And there are many other areas you need to discover. And I really can't forward this because the actions being taken are the same and the outcome is the same. And I think when I got up and, sort of stood up and said it, they're like, okay, she's right. And it's time to just draw a line here, So it varies. Companies are very different in themselves and the people that you work with are very different. So you do have to pick up on those cues. I think that's my take on it. Each person needs somewhat of a personal touch. as well. You know, you need to understand them. I like to know a little bit about their family, and their overall situation, to put it in context, because the day that they are feeling bad or they're angry or something may not be related to the business or what's in front of you and them right there and then. So I do think that's important. I worked as a consultant, my own effort, and, you know, it's lonely on your own and there are pressures of money, and you do tend to have to watch everything. So there's a certain something hanging over you, that maybe others who are in their, you know, fully paid jobs doesn't have. So I always am conscious of that, you know. Yeah.
Yeah. I was a great deal more confident before I left my full-time job to start. You know, I knew we were going to succeed. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I had no idea how hard it would be. And it's so many of the things that you don't expect. The pressure of worrying about, you know, the rest of your team and payroll and realizing that, you know, if you want insurance, you have to buy it yourself. You know, there's no that safety net that you've had, you know, if you've come from full-time employment your whole career, that all of a sudden you look down and it's a long way down and you're falling quite quickly.
And I think that that element of stress, again, back to the subconscious, is there. So people are feeling it without knowing that that's what's causing some of the things that they are feeling or doing. So it's very important that we empathize. So, you know, that we sit in the shoes on the other side, and realize, you know, all of the challenges, not just some of the stuff that we mentor and coach and talk about, but other things that are going on, and give people a space. I have to say, it's a pleasure to work with people in the startup community. It's a pleasure to work with the people because here they're passionate, they're driven, they're strong, they're smart. I'd have to say they're very smart because, you know, they've figured out something different and they're very brave. So it's overall always positive because people aren't trying to do something to hold things back. They're always trying to do something to move things forward. And it mightn't be the right way, but intentions are always good and always, you know, in the right direction.
Yeah, that's one thing that, you know, I'd always heard that co-founders need to have a good relationship because of the stresses that will come. And boy, is that a fact. I mean, even when you've got two people like Julie and I who have, you know, a really good relationship and immense respect for each other, you're both under a lot of pressure. So if you don't have that empathy to think, okay, let me realize the stress that the other person is under as well before thinking how I might react to this what may seem like a curt question, because you have no idea how many meetings she's in between trying to find out something. So if you were to take things the wrong way, that relationship could fall apart quite easily. So it's another element that I had no idea. You know,
it can't be selfish. You know, you do, I think, start out you meet people because they want to do this, you know, and then maybe you're in a co-founding situation where the other person wants to do it and the way you want to do it is slightly different, but underlying that, you're both wanting to do it. And I think it's the same in life. You can analyze a situation and I would always step back from it. Maybe not there and then. Like any other person, I may react because that's human nature. But I'm always able to go back and say, look, that wasn't a good time, or that wasn't appropriate what I did or said. And you know what? That goes a long way. You see it in people, and mature people, not everybody, but I think most people. And I work with mature people as well. A lot of people, and I have to say we haven't touched on this, the average age of the founders that are coming on our radar now is increasing. These are people that have thought about this. They have decided with information to hand that they want to do it. And maybe there's some, I think, inherent desire and passion in saying, I need to do this for myself and give this a go. And that's lovely because they take on board a lot of advice and they can, as we talked about, filter kind of through that and they listen and they're coming to you because they're asking you for that sort of different perspective, for you to challenge them, and that's why they're here. So that's really nice. They're not challenging you back, they're listening to you, and it's lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I don't know, it's just, as I was saying there, it's so much harder than you could ever imagine. But also extremely rewarding. You know, I mean, we haven't even, air quote, made it yet. You know, we're still grinding through, but just what I've learned and what I've started to understand about so many more things that aren't even the technical bits. That's what I thought would be the hardest part, was the technical bits. But it seems that those are actually the easy part. Okay. That's the easier part. I mean, there's still times where I'm banging my head against my desk saying, why won't this work? Why won't this work? But it's so much of the processes to enable the team to work at a rate that can deliver product that is so much harder. What kind of red flags, other than you were saying about the difference between understanding the market and trying to work on the product, but what sort of red flags do you see that when you see within a team that it's quite obvious that you probably don't want to work with them?
One of and you talked about process, and I think people that end up being successful adopt process quickly. They don't necessarily set out doing that, but they see where they can gain efficiencies by putting a process in place. And actually, yourselves, Medit, Julie, and yourself are a great example of that. That's one thing I notice. On the other side, people that don't measure and people that don't have metrics that they look at regularly. So talking with good founders, they don't have to go to their laptop and find some document that they wrote up a financial something on for a session 2 months ago. They roughly know where they're at, because they keep an eye on it, you know. They don't know, like, they go to, well, our sales targets were this and we're roughly on 90%. They know that almost off the top of their head because those things are important. So if I see people that when you talk to them and ask, how are you getting on? What have you mapped for this month in terms of whatever metrics and measures matter to them or should matter to them, and they haven't done it, and they aren't working towards it, I get a bit worried. And you're guaranteed that when I revisit them in 2 weeks or a month or 2 months or 3, they still haven't done it. I'd have to say from experience, those companies, they just don't do well. And it's back to knowing what it, means to achieve. You're going to something, you're working towards a goal, and also that's showing progress for self-satisfaction internally, which I think, you get, but also that you're showing progress externally, and it's making a difference to the bottom line, to how quickly you will get to maybe, revenue or get to investment or something else, which you need to get to make it a successful business. So, definitely a watch out where people don't know where they stand in terms of things they should be measuring, whatever those things should be.
Now, is that for people who are already in the program, or is that for people who are trying to be selected?
More so for people, I would say, in program. But in saying that, I see it because the way that we kind of bring people in to the program is that we also touch base with them over a number of months. So we, in a way, filter by having a number of touch points with them, meeting them face to face, having phone calls with them. And I always come off a phone call and set up another time with the person in a time frame that makes sense for them, and agreeing that it's 4 weeks or it's 2 months or whatever, and revisiting them then and seeing, have they progressed along the same train of thought? Is it a product that's progressing? Have they also done some of that market research? And are they measuring something to show that they're progressing? People that aren't generally hop around a lot, or generally have the same or a very similar story for you as they'd had 6 weeks or 6 months prior. And you know that in any sense, they won't be able to move towards success or achieve milestones that they need to for the business. Yeah.
Okay. What types of stage of people should reach out to you to, see if they would be a good fit?
We have, I guess, probably 2 different sets of businesses that we support. And the Dublin program, or Dublin-based program, is looking to people, I guess, that have some validation in the market. What that means is that they are working with customers, and they have a market pull. So there are customers quite interested, and maybe a ways along to paying them or contracting and having a trial or a paid trial in place. So people at that stage are a team that has collected and are committed, that they are committed to, somewhat the MVP, which can be technical or non-technical, but that a solution that they have is getting a job done and it's better than what a customer already has, and that they are now seeing customers adopt it in some shape or form. And those customers are on a route to being a paying customer. And you aren't a customer until you're paying, and you aren't a business until you have paying customers, is the way I see it. But that's the type of thing we're seeking in Dublin. For our regional accelerators, we don't expect people to be maybe quite so far along. And people in Waterford and Galway in those programs would certainly have their team. As I mentioned, one gentleman left his day job and then came into the program, and that was his first step into full-time entrepreneurship. So they are a little bit maybe earlier. They also maybe not as far along in having customers towards payment, but more that they do have evidence of interest from customers, that they've done a body of market research to what we talked about, that there is enough people with this problem that they also perceive, and that there is a need out there in the market that's going to be big enough for them to fill, and that there's an opportunity out of that. So we do see people from all over the country coming to all of those various locations. There's really no bias geographically. We've had people on the program last year travel from Donegal to Dublin for it. We had people from Kildare that were based on the Galway program, people from Dublin on the program out of Waterford. So the fact that they're in those particular regions is not to do with the fact that they need to be from that area. But it is nice to have people who are outside of Dublin able to go freely to and fro a program that maybe doesn't entail them coming into a city or living at a high cost in Dublin. So I love to see that. I'm from the country. I lived in Galway for many years. So I love to see that there's more and more opportunities for people starting a business, that they can look up and look out and see, okay, there's a number of options for me in terms of support. So I'd hope to see more and more of that.
Where do you see the balance there of, or I don't know if balance is the right word, but understanding the problem versus the solution. So if someone really, really understands the problem and knows that they have enough information to solve the problem, or knowledge, not necessarily information, but enough knowledge to solve the problem, enough experience in the market or in the field, but don't quite have that solution that would, as you said, solve the problem better for the customers, but they know that the solution that exists is terrible.
Yes.
So is that still someone that?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So, often people come with the solution first, but it is born out of initially seeing the problem, and then they do get wrapped up in the solution. It is very important to validate that there is a problem, and as you mentioned, that they've come from that industry or an environment where they've, encountered the problem. But to go outside of their environment and to go beyond that, and geographically as well as across an industry or industries, and make sure that the problem is not solved somewhere else. I'll give you a great example from a prior life where, we were looking at problems in hospital. We were watching, cardiac procedures, and we could see all of the different issues. And some of them we were going to come back and try and solve. But we also were in public sector and private hospitals. And interestingly, a lot of the problems that were in the public sector hospitals were solved in the private sector. So I think, there's two ways to think about that. You can take to the private or to the public the private solutions, and that's an opportunity. Or you need to make sure that there isn't an easy fix for your problem, and that you can add greater value to a deeper problem. So there's a lot of, I think, analysis and validation of the problem as well before you start. I'd love to see people coming with that evidence. I think you can have, and there's a great, it's the job's done sort of approach to things where you can get a job done. And the example is listening to music. You can turn on a radio years back and listen to somebody. It wasn't great quality, but that was a big, leap and jump, as opposed to having to wait for, 3 months for a band to come to the local area. Or you can fly to Virginia and go see them in their hometown. But then there was vinyl, there was records. So you could actually listen to the song, not just hope that you'll hear it on the radio, but you could listen to the one that you like, or the actual musician you like. And that was in-house and you had control over it. Isn't that fantastic? And, it was a large implement, it was a large solution, but it worked and it solved the problem better than a radio. And then there was, in my time, I got one of my first kind of grown up presents from Santa Claus was a tape, cassette player, a Walkman. Wow. Show my age now. And, I got a tape and tapes that I wanted. So that was better. It was mobile. It was smaller. And you see where I'm going with this. The same outcome, was that I could listen to music. But each time it got more effective. So you have to think of it like that. The job is getting done. People say there's no competition. Yeah, there is. There's a bad way that people are doing it in their manual, roundabout way, but they're getting the job done. Or there are better ways. And, you need to think about that on a spectrum of where you're placing your solution, and where the market out there, has other solutions. So sometimes you do need to be 10x better, because people are hard to change. You need to be portable versus the record player because it's so much more expensive. So you need to, think about your solution in terms of, will it be adopted? And the barriers to adoption, be it pricing or actually just habit and change, and all sorts of things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And if there's no competition solving the problem at its basis form, then is it a problem? Are you trying to create a problem?
Okay, interesting. That's interesting.
So
yeah.
if that problem's not being solved some way, so as you were saying with the music, if there was no music, I guess someone had to invent music, right? But that was a pretty long time ago. So.
Well, that was from Oscar Wilde's fairy tale. That was a stingray that flew around the earth and made some beautiful sounds. I remember reading that many years ago and I thought, wow, what a beautiful image of music. But there you go.
Well, it's like I heard someone try to say that, try to use the analogy that, Twitter existed a long, long time ago, even when it was a scroll of paper tied to a homing pigeon's leg.
Correct. Yeah.
So, you're not really there aren't many new problems. There are just new iterations of old problems.
Yeah. And so iteration, and I learned this as well throughout my career. Be careful in giving everything, you do have to iterate your product because you have to, and the iPhone is a great example everybody knows of, but there are many other products that we don't really realize are getting iterated, but everything around us is iterated. Things are held back. So don't over feature your product. One, believe me, the features will not all be used, and certainly not by the majority. But you do want to hold back so that you can make sure that you can keep on satisfying the target group, or that you can bring in new customers as well with the next iteration and so on. So those are tactics in terms of a product strategy you need to think about.
Yeah, with our software product. One of the things that I'm constantly bringing up is there something we should remove? In fact, some of the things that I did this week were actually pulling some elements out, because if you keep adding, then you end up with like the old Microsoft Word from, the late 90s, where there were a million buttons and you couldn't find anything. So the more you add, the more cognitive overload there is for the user, the harder it is to use, the less enjoyable it is, the less users.
Yeah, and it's a balance between function, and we do hear a lot about usability, ease of use, and experience. And it is a customer experience. I was, kind of exposed to a service over the last year or so that someone had bought for me as a gift. But the experience every single time I went to go there to a beautician's was horrendous, and I dreaded going. And it was paid for, and I thought I better use this, but I really dreaded it. And I've absolutely never going back now that the voucher is used up. And I'm going to go to somewhere else that may be more expensive, or maybe they're a different level of experience. But the user experience, and I've been to one session with them since. Oh my goodness, it was just so much more delightful. And you have to think about what the emotional drivers or the feelings of the consumer and the user are as well. It's not all about functionality. And I think too, I've moved from technical probably more towards the marketing side. And again, that was a penny drop for me, that perception is 9/10 of the law. I've gone from medical products where really they're evidence-based. So you do have to have the evidence. But how that's also packaged can be very interesting. So from having the basic facts, and as a scientist, I'd be very interested in all those details, and as are physicians and other users. But how that's actually packaged, and people with very little time sometimes, they just build on perception, and we all have a gut feeling. And so don't ever underestimate that, and don't underestimate the power of marketing, and don't take it as something you'll add in afterwards either. You have to create a story around what you're putting forward.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think the people in the startup world or just entering the startup world should know?
I think, you've said it. It is difficult. What we do tend to see are all the successes. And I think from the US originally, I worked and lived over there as well. And I even lived in the Bay Area. Here still on this side of the world, and maybe it's more Irish than others, failure still seems to be, no, that didn't work out. And I think people in other parts celebrate the fact that you tried something and you learned. So never be afraid to try it and to learn. But do step back, and so don't keep on putting your head down. Do take your head up and say, that's okay. That's absolutely fine that I tried that. And I remember being at a session where somebody asked a recruiter about, what if I do my startup and it doesn't work out? Will that be sort of viewed negatively? And absolutely not, was the answer from the recruiter. And I've even seen somebody who, didn't progress their business and decided to go out into the working world again. And they were snapped up, because someone who can sort of work to their own timelines, who can engineer those, who can think differently, who can be brave, who can bring things forward. Absolutely someone that, would be really valued in any setting. So don't be afraid, but do not underestimate how hard it is. And if it doesn't work out, that's fine too. It's actually a really good thing and a really good lesson to learn. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Anything that you'd like people to do? Call to action. Call to action.
I guess NDRC, myself, my colleagues in particular are very friendly. I think my approach is to give, and maybe get back then, or, the other way around, because I don't mind people engaging with me. If it's on LinkedIn, I get a lot of messages now through that, or, through calls coming into us. Don't be afraid to come and chat to us. We're here and, most of the time we are meeting people, every single day and every single week, and talk to us. We'll offer advice, even if it's not, you potentially aiming towards coming into us. The fact that we're a group of people with lots of experience in the startup world, and working with lots of, startup companies, maybe we can give you something that could help. And I like to have people on the phone say, thanks very much, for that call. And it just really helped me to think about things in a different way. And that's very satisfying.
Excellent. So, on LinkedIn, I'll put these in the show notes, but where else can people reach you?
So you're more than welcome to email me, at angela.duffy@ndrc.ie. I don't use Instagram for this. I use Instagram for my photography and my efforts there, but, also on Twitter. So I'm Angela, I think it's _Duffy, or I think it's @_Angela Duffy. I should check here.
But I'll put it in the show notes, so there'll be
brilliant.
A link.
Yeah. Twitter, LinkedIn, and email. Angela.Duffy@ndrc.ie.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you.
Until next time, remember, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.